the Biden administration, now think about this for a moment, folks, shuts down the very investigation that was already ready to issue its final findings. And yet the administration comes in and says, don't issue those findings. We're not satisfied with those findings, which means they didn't like what they were going to find.
There was a investigation opened by former Secretary of State, now a Senior Counsel of Global Affairs, the ACLJ, Mike Pompeo, at the State Department and their investigative team to look at the origins of COVID-19, the lab theory, and whether or not the Chinese military, how involved they were.
A year later, all evidence points to that's exactly what happened. And the Biden administration, and this is what people need to really understand, the Biden administration shuts down the very investigation that already had come to its draft conclusions.
It does look like the administration was on the verge of saying this is the most likely scenario. And I would tell you this. The American people deserve to know that because of how China handled the response to that. They need to know, and the rest of the world needs to know how to respond to China.
Whether the Biden White House wants to do an investigation or not, we employ a whole bunch of people at intelligence agencies who are looking and who know a lot more information than what we have than last summer. Last summer was the public statement, but we have a disinterested media group in Washington to figure out what's been updated since then. Either they're asking the questions and they're finding really bad answers and they want to cover up for the ruling party, or they're not asking the questions.
It's a legal problem and it's a political problem. The legal problem is you had an investigation that was ongoing that already had come to a draft conclusion. And then the political problem is, they stop it before it's released.
Why would you stop an investigation like this? It's because if information comes out that shows China is more culpable than you have suggested they are, then they're going to have to be held to account. And that is an accounting that this administration is not interested in having.
Their reason for shutting down this investigation, though, was because they had questions about the legitimacy of the findings and an ineffective use of resources. Now, to me, as someone who's been practicing law for 40 years, I look at that and say, no, wait a minute. Are you really saying that you don't like the findings and we're not going to let this continue because the findings are going to cut totally against the narrative that they had in play here?
That very well could be the case, but it also could be that they knew something else through better sourcing and they didn't want the State Department to take the lead. They wanted it to be more legitimate. Look, there's a whole bunch of questions here. Yeah. And that's why we got to go back to the fact that the IC, through Avril Haines, needs to come forward and answer some questions. The role of Congress is big here. We need to have our congressional leaders asking these questions. Why shut down one investigation? The only answer that's acceptable is that we have better information in another angle.
Does President Biden think these theories we hear more about now, that COVID-19 may have been man-made and escaped from a lab in China, are a wacky conspiracy theory, or based on what he has heard and been briefed on, does he think that's possible?
Well, we went through this journey together yesterday, so let's do it again. So the president believes there needs to be an independent investigation, one that's run by the international community. It's an international pandemic that has killed hundreds of thousands of people around the world.
He believes there should be an international investigation. Let me tell you what I think. I think we should have an American led investigation. Yes, the pandemic affected the entire world, and there's no doubt about that. But we have an obligation, the president has an obligation, to make sure we know what happened here. And what I cannot understand for the life of me is, except I do know the answer to this, is that he was deferring this because he doesn't want these findings to come out.
It's a total joke to think that somehow the UN, the World Health Organization, is going to do any investigation. The Chinese control the WHO. We know this. The intelligence community knows this. The Germans know this. The Europeans know this. This is a joke.
They know this is going to all come out. So what is the calculation?
The calculation is as long as possible. You get further away from it. You know what? If there is no actual investigation, we won't ever have an answer. So it may come out that they've shut down investigation because they like the initial findings, but it wasn't done. None of these get to completion. The World Health Organization, they don't agree with their initial findings, but they're gonna go in with another team and try to. The further you get away from the beginning of this pandemic, the harder it is going to be to pinpoint when this pandemic, how this pandemic started.
What they're really doing here is playing politics, because now the media, I mean, that what Jordan read earlier, where you had a fact checker for the Washington Post mocking Ted Cruz, saying Ted Cruz doesn't listen to science. He's not being scientific. He's not following the scientific evidence because he believes that this may have been intentionally created in the lab in Wuhan, China. Then, a year later, that same fact checker says, yeah, the evidence seems to be looking like it may well have been created in Wuhan, China, in the lab.
Huge shift. This idea now that it's becoming normal to accept the idea that the Chinese created this in a lab. And the second question then is, did it get out intentionally or unintentionally?